very concerned it's not safe. Yeah, that's a problem, man. There's no guarantee that it's going to work. I'd have to test it. Zinsco and Federal Pacific. If zero was an option, I would go with zero. Just because, I've unfortunately, I've been in situations where I've seen where they failed. So I have no trust in them. I noticed that there are 2 wires underneath one terminal or screw on a breaker or an emergency shutoff. The issue with that is if you put 2 wires underneath one connection and try to push a wire or push a screw into it, you run the risk of separating those wires and causing a loose connection. And a loose connection is what causes heat and can in turn, it could damage the breaker, it could damage the panel. Also, it's not safe. If we're just going to talk about outlets, one of the first things that I look for is this, me personally, is like the slide before, we talked about 2 wires being underneath one terminal, and the risk with that is that screw can't get proper connection on either one of the wires because there's 2 setting there. So one of those wires is left without a proper electrical connection. Well, a bad electrical connection creates heat. Heat left over a period of time compounds until heat does what heat does, essentially. So when we're talking about outlets and we're talking about burned outlets or anything like that, like what are some of the indicators that I can look for before it ever gets to that point? One of the biggest ones that I see is when I plug something in and it starts getting loose. When I plugged that lamp in a couple years ago, it went in there tight and it was secure, and if I wanted to remove that, I had to put some force behind it. But now when I look over there at it, it's kind of fallen out of there a little bit. When we have loose connections create heat. Another thing to look out for is outlets that are used a lot. If I unplug a vacuum cleaner in and out of that outlet, every time that I vacuum, that outlet's gonna get wore out at a significantly higher rate than one that doesn't have anything plugged into it, or only has something plugged into it but it stays there all the time, like maybe a microwave or a blender or something like that, like a kitchen appliance that stays in one place. Very concerned. At face value, everything looks pretty good. Me being an electrician, maybe someone else wouldn't notice that it's a Square D panel. Square D is a good, reputable brand. They're a publicly traded company. They're very good. What has happened here, though, is it's got severe water damage. So if you look over there on the right side to where those wires look like they're yellow almost, and if you look up there at the top, you're going to see that some of them have that kind of white powder-looking stuff on them. That's actually corrosion. What's happened there is water has gotten inside of that electrical panel somehow, and over a period of time was left unattended, okay? When water gets on electrical components or metal, which all electrical components are made out of metal, it will rust. Anything inside of a panel, 90% of the material inside of a panel, it is not water resistant. Water and electricity don't mix. Water has gotten on the inside of that panel, it's created rust, and that rust prevents the flow of electricity from one metal component to the other. If something is restricting flow of electricity, that creates heat. And when it creates enough heat, it will cause corrosion, and that corrosion is that white powdery substance that's there. It also compounds the restriction of flow of electricity from metal component to metal component, and eventually will cause enough heat that it will melt the insulation off of the wire. And it's something that would need to be replaced within the next, I'd have to test it, within the next week or 2. Yeah, dude. What could go wrong here? The surge strips are not designed to have very much electricity flow through them at all. They are very bad protectors of electrical surges, and even worse, dividers of electricity. We've seen them melt, literally. We've gone to calls where they've melted to the point where the casing that held the metal components melted away and the 2 metal components touched and caused a short. I would say probably one of the most common calls that the fire department gets is for these splitters that cause heat and eventually cause problems. Why spend money replacing a panel when the one on the left was technically still functional is because that panel is outdated, obsolete, there are no replacement parts, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work in the event of an emergency. The analogy that I give is this. Imagine that you had a 65-year-old vehicle. The oil had never been changed in it. It had never had any maintenance done to it whatsoever, none. That you're looking at that vehicle as it came off the showroom floor in 1965. Let me ask you this. Would you take you and your family and get in that vehicle and get on the highway and drive it up to 65 miles an hour and mash on the brakes and expect it to work in the event of an emergency the way that it should? Would you trust it? That electrical panel may turn the lights on, but if there's a fault in the electrical system, there's no guarantee that it's going to work because it has never been maintained either. That's why I would replace it. Handyman. Daily. Every piece of wire has individual conductors inside of it that are made of copper, and around those pieces of copper, they have insulation around them, and then around each one of those individual conductors, there's kind of a whole casing. We call that casing insulation, okay? In the old days, past knob and tube wiring, so 1930s to 1960s, they used what was called cloth wire. The most dangerous thing that we see is this. That wire in homes that is ran across a wooden stud, so something combustible, with a metal staple driven over it, and right over that metal staple where it pinched that wire down into the wood, okay, that newspaper and that oil substance dissipated, the newspaper and yarn frayed, and you're left with a metal staple pinching over two conductors, which causes a short that's setting on top of a piece of wood, which is a combustible substance. One of the worst situations that I ever seen, a home remodeler called us out because they were flipping a home and they had lost power to part of the home. And when I got into the attic of that home, I stepped up through the attic entry and took a flashlight, and there was a wire that was running parallel with the opening. And as I took my flashlight down that wire, I could see burn mark, burn mark, burn mark, burn mark. You know, it's obsolete for a reason. There's a reason that they did that for 3 decades, and there's a reason that we have what we have today. Anything that has changed in the electrical code has changed as a result of either persons or property being injured or damaged or lost. Every time that has happened, there has been an adjustment in the code cycle to ensure, to the best of our human ability, that doesn't happen again, and cloth wire is another one of those. Today, the insulation that is made around wire is the same, pretty close to the same material as what sneaker soles are made out of. If you go to our supply houses and go into the rooms where they keep all of the wire, it smells like Foot Locker in there, because that's the material that it's made out of. So imagine something being protected by something that you walk on every day, as hardy and as sturdy as that is, and as long as it lasts, or like a piece of newspaper and yarn woven together. Watts Rod Electric, problem solved.